Have you ever stayed in a hotel that just felt off? Maybe the wallpaper was peeling, or the hallways were a little too quiet. For one businessman named Mark, an old hotel's vintage charm quickly turned into a living nightmare. This is the story of the phone that called itself. Mark was on a business trip, a long way from home. He needed a place to stay for just a couple of nights, and found this old hotel that looked like it was frozen in time. It had character, he thought. The lobby was filled with antique furniture, and the receptionist, a kind-faced older woman, gave him a heavy, ornate brass key for his room on the 3rd floor. Room 314. The room itself was spacious, with a high ceiling and a 4-poster bed. Everything had a slightly dusty, antique smell. On the bedside table sat a classic rotary phone, the kind you have to stick your finger in and spin. It was a novelty, a fun little throwback. He unpacked his suitcase, made a few calls on his cell phone, and settled in for the night. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and he drifted off to sleep almost immediately. Then it happened. A shrill, piercing ring cut through the silence of the room. Mark shot up in bed, his heart pounding. He fumbled for the lamp, squinting in the sudden brightness. The old rotary phone was ringing, its jarring sound echoing off the walls. He glanced at his watch. It was 3:14 a.m. Who on earth would be calling the room phone at this hour? Hesitantly, he picked up the heavy receiver. "Hello," he said, his voice thick with sleep. Silence. All he could hear was a faint, static-filled sound, almost like someone breathing on the other end. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Still, nothing. Just that soft, unsettling breath. He hung up, confused and annoyed. Probably a wrong number, or maybe some prankster in another room. He turned off the light and tried to go back to sleep. But the strange call left him feeling uneasy. The next night, he was determined to get a good night's rest. He had a big meeting the next day and couldn't afford to be tired. He fell asleep around 11, feeling much more relaxed. But then, just like before, he was jolted awake by the same loud, insistent whine. He didn't even have to look at his watch. He knew. It was 3:14 a.m. This time, a shiver ran down his spine. He reached for the phone, his hand trembling slightly. "Who is this?" he demanded as soon as he picked it up. Again, only silence answered him. But the breathing was there, a little clearer this time. A slow, raspy inhale and exhale. It sounded like it was right next to his ear. Panicked, he slammed the receiver back onto its cradle. His heart was racing. This wasn't a prank. Something was very wrong. He picked up the receiver again to call the front desk, but there was no dial tone. Whose dead air, utterly silent. Now he was truly scared. How could the phone ring if it couldn't even make a call? He spent the rest of the night with the lights on, sitting in a chair, staring at the silent, black phone until the sun came up. The first thing he did that morning was march down to the front desk. He was exhausted and furious. He explained to the morning clerk, a young man this time, that his room phone had been ringing at 3:14 a.m. for 2 nights in a row. "And when I answer, there's no one there," he finished, trying to keep his voice steady. The clerk looked confused. He typed something into his computer. "Sir, I can assure you, no calls were placed to your room from the front desk, and our system shows no external calls coming into your room either." "Well, someone is calling," Mark insisted. "And when I tried to call you last night, the line was dead." The clerk's confusion deepened. "That's strange," he said. "I'll tell you what. I'll send our maintenance guy up to check the line right away. Maybe there's a wiring issue." Mark went back to his room to pack, wanting to leave as soon as possible. About 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. It was the maintenance man, a friendly guy in a blue jumpsuit. "Came to check on this phone for ya," he said, walking over to the bedside table. He picked up the phone, turned it out bare, and followed the cord with his eyes. It knelt down, tracing the wire along the baseboard behind the bed. After a moment, he stood up, a completely bewildered expression on his face. "Well, sir," he said slowly, "I think I found your problem." "Is it a bad connection?" Mark asked. The maintenance man shook his head. "It's worse than that." He pointed to the end of the phone cord. which was just lying on the floor, its metal tip covered in a thick layer of dust. This phone, it isn't connected to anything. The jack in the wall was sealed up years ago. Mark felt a cold dread wash over him. He stared at the disconnected cord, then back at the phone. It was impossible. A phone with no connection can't ring. He had heard it. He had answered it. He grabbed his bags. "I'm checking out," he told the maintenance man, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't even wait for a response. He stormed down to the lobby, threw the heavy brass key on the counter, and said, "I'm leaving." Now, the clerk looked up, startled by his abruptness. As Mark turned to leave, the older woman from his first night was just coming on her shift. She saw the look on his face and the key for room 314 on the counter. Her expression changed to one of pity. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she asked softly. Mark stopped and turned. "Heard what?" "The phone." She nodded sadly. "The phone in room 314. It's been disconnected for over a decade. Some kind of electrical fault," they said. "Too expensive to fix," she leaned in, lowering her voice. "But we still hear it. The housekeepers, the night staff. Sometimes when you walk past that room, you can hear it ringing." "Always around the same time, las 13:14? Mark asked, his blood running cold. She nodded again. "Years ago, a guest passed away in that room. A lonely, old man. The paramedic said the time of death was estimated to be around 3:14 in the morning. He was found with the phone receiver in his hand, as if he was trying to call for help." Mark didn't say another word. He walked out of that hotel and never looked back. He still thinks about it sometimes, in the middle of the night. He thinks about that disconnected black phone and the faint, ghostly breathing on the other end of the line. Some calls, it seems, come from a place with no connection at all. What do you think? Was it just a faulty wire causing some phantom sound? Or was something or someone really trying to make a call from beyond the grave? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more chilling tales. Thanks for watching. Have you ever stayed in a hotel room and felt like you weren't quite alone? That strange feeling when you find something just slightly out of place from how you left it. Today, we're checking into a story that takes that feeling to a whole new level. A tale from a luxury hotel where the service is so dedicated, it literally never stops. Imagine this. You're a guest at a high-end hotel, expecting nothing but the best. But night after night, you noticed odd little things. You come back to your room, and the towels you used are folded perfectly, even though housekeeping hasn't been by. You wake up in the middle of the night, certain you left the bathroom light on, only to find it switched off. Sometimes, you wake up to a cool breeze, discovering the window is cracked open, even though you distinctly remember closing and locking it before bed. These aren't just one-off incidents. Guest after guest reports the same peculiar happenings. They're small things, easily dismissed. Maybe you were just tired and forgot you turned off the light. Maybe the wind somehow pushed the window open. But when it happens repeatedly, two different people in different rooms, a pattern starts to emerge. The hotel staff would receive these reports, offer a polite apology, maybe switch the guest room, but they never had a solid explanation. It was just one of those weird quirks of the old building, that saying. But one guest, let's call him David, was not so easily convinced. David was a businessman, a logical, known-and-sense kind of guy. He was staying at the hotel for an extended business trip, and for the first week, everything was perfect. Then, the strange occurrences began. He'd leave a book on his nightstand, open to the page he was reading, and find it closed with the bookmark tucked inside. He'd leave his toiletries scattered on the bathroom counter in a morning rush, only to return in the evening to find them neatly lined up. At first, he just figured the housekeeping staff was exceptionally thorough, maybe a little too thorough. But then it started happening at night, while he was asleep in the room. He was a light sleeper, and he would have heard someone come in. The most unsettling incident was the lights. He always slept with a small lamp on, a habit from childhood. Yet, he'd wake up in complete darkness, the lamp switched off. This happened 3 nights in a row. David was starting to feel unnerved. He knew he wasn't just forgetting things. He decided to test his theory. Was someone entering his room at night? He ruled out sleepwalking. He'd never had a history of it. So, Before going to sleep on the fourth night, he took his large, heavy suitcase and wedged it firmly against the inside of the door. It was a solid, heavy-set door, and the suitcase was packed full. There was no way anyone could open the door from the outside without making a massive racket and moving the suitcase. Satisfied, he turned on his lamp and went to bed. When David woke up the next morning, the first thing he noticed was the darkness. The lamp was off again. His heart started to pound. He sat up and looked towards the door. The door was closed and locked, just as he'd left it. But his heavy suitcase was no longer by the door. It was sitting neatly on the other side of the room, placed against the far wall as if it were just another piece of furniture. That was it. David was officially spooked. He got dressed, marched down to the front desk, and demanded to speak with the hotel manager. He explained everything, from the rearranged towels to the moving suitcase. He insisted that someone had been in his room and that it was a massive security breach. The manager listened patiently, his expression calm, almost ... knowing. He assured David that he would personally review the security footage from the hallway outside his room. The hotel had state-of-the-art cameras covering every inch of the corridors. 24/7. If someone had used a key, a master key, or even picked the lock, it would be on camera. A few hours later, the manager called David down to his office. "Mr. David," he began, "I've reviewed the entire night's footage from the camera outside your door. I watched it myself, minute by minute." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Absolutely no one entered or exited your room after you went in last night. The camera shows an empty, undisturbed hallway from the moment you closed your door until you opened it this morning." David was speechless. How was that possible? The suitcase didn't just get up and walk across the room by itself. The lamp didn't turn itself off. He accused the manager of covering something up, but the manager simply offered to show him the footage. And sure enough, there it was. A long, uneventful recording of an empty hallway. No staff, no mysterious figures, nothing. Seeing the genuine distress on David's face, the manager sighed and lowered his voice. He leaned in and said, "Look, this is strictly off the record. We don't advertise this, and I'll deny it if you repeat it. But you're not the first person this has happened to." He went on to explain that these strange occurrences had been reported for years, almost as long as the hotel had been standing. Longtime staff members had their own theory, a story they only shared in hushed tones among themselves. The story of a former housekeeper. Her name was Eleanor. She had worked at the hotel for over 40 years, starting as a young woman and staying until her retirement. She wasn't just an employee. The hotel was her life. She took immense pride in her work, believing that a perfectly kept room could bring peace and comfort to a weary traveler. She had her own way of doing things, the precise way a towel should be folded, the exact angle a curtain should be drawn, the belief that sleeping in total darkness was more restful. Eleanor knew the building's every creak and groan. She treated each room as if it were a guest room in her own home. Even after she retired, she would sometimes call the front desk just to ask how things were, or if the new linen service was up to standard. She passed away peacefully a few years after her retirement. The strange incidents the staff had noticed seemed to become more frequent during periods of change at the hotel, especially during renovations. It was during a major renovation of David's floor that his experiences began. The theory among the staff was that Eleanor's spirit was still there. She wasn't a malicious presence, not a ghost in the scary sense. She was simply ... housekeeping. They believed that when things were disrupted, like during a renovation, her spirit would become more active, trying to maintain order and keep the rooms to her impeccable standards. She would tidy up, turn off unnecessary lights to save energy, and even crack a window to let in fresh air. As for David's suitcase blocking the door, well, to Eleanor, that was just an obstruction, a piece of luggage left in the wrong place, a tripping hazard. So she simply moved it to where it belonged, out of the way. She wasn't trying to scare him, she was just trying to tidy up. She was the hotel's invisible housekeeper. David didn't know what to believe. A ghost? It sounded insane. Well, what other explanation was there? The locked door, the security footage, the suitcase moving on its own. He checked out of the hotel that day, but the story stayed with him. The hotel, of course, never officially acknowledges the story of Eleanor. To the public, it's just a luxury establishment with impeccable, if sometimes mysterious, service. But for those who have stayed there and experienced the phantom tiding, they leave with a story to tell. The story of a housekeeper so dedicated to her job that not even leaving this world could make her stop. So next time you're in a hotel and you find your room just a little too perfect, maybe it's not just great service. Maybe, just maybe, you have your own invisible housekeeper looking out for you. What do you think? Could a spirit really be so attached to their job? Or is there a more logical explanation we're all missing? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more strange tales. We'll see you in the next one. Have you ever had that strange feeling in a hotel room? That sense that you're not entirely alone? Well, pull up a chair and turn down the lights, because this story is about a hotel room so unsettling, they had to seal it shut for good. Our story begins with a weary, let's call him Mark. After a long flight and a delayed connection, he finally arrived at his hotel late at night. The receptionist, looking a bit flustered, handed him a key card. "We've had to make a last-minute change, sir," she said. "We're putting you in room 222. Mark didn't think much of it. A room was a room, and all he wanted was a soft bed and a few hours of sleep. He thanked her, grabbed his luggage, and headed for the elevator. Room 222 was at the very end of a long, dimly lit corridor. The air seemed to get colder the closer he got. He swiped the key card. The little green light blinked, and he pushed the heavy wooden door open. The room was fine, a bit dated, perhaps, with floral wallpaper and dark, heavy furniture, but it was clean and spacious. Mark tossed his bag on the luggage rack, kicked off his shoes, and performed his usual hotel room ritual. Checking the locks, he slid the deadbolt across and flipped the security latch. Secure. Satisfied, he flopped onto the bed and was out like a light. The peace didn't last long. Around 2 a.m., Mark was jolted awake by a sound. Jiggle. Jiggle. Rattle. It was the door handle. It wasn't just a gentle turn. It was aggressive, violent, as if someone was desperately trying to force their way in. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs. He sat bolt upright in bed, eyes wide, staring at the door. The rattling stopped, then started again, even more frantic this time. Who on earth could be trying to get into his room at this hour? He fumbled for his phone on the nightstand, his hands shaking slightly. He called the front desk. "Hello, this is Mark in room 222. Someone is trying to break into my room." The night manager's voice was calm, reassuring. "Stay right there, sir. I'm sending security up immediately." Mark kept his eyes glued to the door, listening to the handle shake and rattle. It was relentless. Within a minute, he heard footsteps pounding down the hallway. He heard a firm voice call out, "Security, is everything all right in there?" Mark shouted back, "I'm in here. Someone's trying to get in." The rattling stopped instantly, absolute silence. The security guard spoke again, his voice now closer to the door. "Sir, can you open the door for us?" Mark hesitated. "Is it safe?" he asked. "Yes, sir. There's no one out here. The hallway is completely empty." Cautiously, Mark crept over to the door. He peered through the peephole. Sure enough, the fisheye lens showed 2 uniformed security guards standing in an empty corridor. He took a deep breath, unlatched the security chain, and turned the deadbolt. He opened the door to face the 2 guards. "You're sure you saw no one?" Mark asked, his voice still trembling. The older guard shook his head. "Not a soul, sir. We came straight up. We also checked the security cameras for this floor. The hallway has been empty for the last 20 minutes. He then inspected the lock, and this door was securely locked from the inside. Deadbolt and latch. There's no way anyone could have been turning the handle from the outside. The guards were professional but seemed a little unsurprised. They offered to stand guard outside his door for a while, an offer Mark gratefully accepted. Feeling a bit safer, he went back inside, making sure to relock the door just as securely as before. He sat on the edge of the bed, his adrenaline still pumping. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the old building settling. A mechanical fault in the lock, but the shaking had felt so deliberate, so human. He must have been sitting there for about 10 minutes when the guards presumably left, thinking the coast was clear. The hallway fell silent once more. Mark was just starting to calm down, just starting to think maybe it was all in his head when it happened. Without a sound, the deadbolt on his door slid open on its own. Click. Then, the security latch, that little metal arm he had flipped into place, lifted up and swung free. Mark stared, frozen in disbelief, and then the door handle turned downwards, slowly, deliberately. The door began to creak open. An inch, 2 inches, a foot. It swung open into the room, revealing the dark, empty hallway beyond. Mark's breath hitched in his throat. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. He was paralyzed with a kind of fear he had never known. The door hung open for a few long, agonizing seconds. Then, with a sudden, violent force, it slammed shut. Boom. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. The force was so strong it shook the pictures on the wall. That was it. Mark scrambled for his belongings, throwing them into his suitcase with frantic, clumsy movements. He didn't even bother to put on his shoes. He yanked the door open diagonally Noan, sprinted down the hallway, not daring to look back. He burst into the lobby, breathless and terrified. The night manager looked up, his calm demeanor finally cracking when he saw the sheer terror on Mark's face. Room 122, Mark gasped. The door. It opened by itself. The manager's face went pale. He sighed and motioned for Mark to take a seat. "I am so sorry, sir," he began, his voice low. Normally we don't use that room. It's supposed to be kept vacant. We were overbooked tonight, and it was a mistake to place you there." He explained that for years, guests who had stayed in room 222 reported the exact same phenomenon, an aggressive rattling of the doorknob late at night, followed by the door unlocking and opening on its own, only to slam shut moments later. Security would always find the hallway empty and the door locked from the inside. They'd replaced the lock, the handle, even the entire door multiple times. Nothing worked. The incidents continued. The hotel had tried to keep it quiet, of course, but the stories persisted. Some staff members whispered it was the ghost of a guest who had passed away in that room long ago, forever trying to get back in or, perhaps, get out. The hotel finally took the room out of commission, using it only for storage. Mark spent the rest of the night on a sofa in the lobby, too shaken to even consider another room. The next day, he checked out and found a different hotel. He later heard from an acquaintance who knew one of the hotel managers that the complaints about room 2022 didn't stop, even when it was empty. Staff would hear the rattling, and sometimes find the door wide open in the morning when they knew it had been locked. The hotel's management eventually decided they had had enough. During a major renovation a few years later, they took an extreme step. They didn't just decommission room 222, they erased Italiano. The room was gutted. The walls were torn down and rebuilt to change the floor plan. And the original doorway, the one that caused so much terror, was bricked up and plastered over, forever sealed from the inside. If you were to walk down that hallway today, you'd never even know a room 222 ever existed. But the story remains, a chilling reminder of the door that wouldn't stay closed. Thanks for watching. If you have a spooky story of your own, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more strange dailies. Sleep tight. Have you ever checked into a hotel room and felt like something was just off? You can't quite put your finger on it, but a little chill runs down your spine. That's exactly what happened to a young couple. Let's call them Mark and Sarah. During what was supposed to be a romantic getaway at a beautiful lakeside resort. The room was perfect at first glance. It had a huge window overlooking the glistening water, a cozy fireplace, and all the amenities you could ask for. But there was one feature that dominated the room. A massive, ornate mirror covering almost an entire wall. It was the kind of antique piece that looked like it had 1,000 stories to tell. And as Mark and Sarah would soon find out, it did. It started subtly. Sarah was brushing her hair in front of the mirror when she noticed something odd. In the reflection, the lamp on the nightstand seemed to be a few inches to the left of where it actually was. She blinked, shook her head, and looked again. It was still shifted. She called Mark over. He squinted at it, laughed, and said it was probably just a warp in the old glass. A common thing with antiques. It made sense, eh? So they brushed it off and went about their day, enjoying the lake and the beautiful scenery. But the strange occurrences didn't stop there. Later that evening, as they were getting ready for dinner, Mark glanced at the mirror and froze. For just a split second, he saw a faint, shadowy figure standing near the window in the reflection. But when he spun around, the room was empty. A told Sarah, who was now starting to feel a genuine sense of unease. They tried to rationalize it again. A trick of the light, the setting sun, casting weird shadows. But the feeling of being watched began to creep in, and the grand mirror on the wall started to feel less like a decoration and more like an unwelcome observer. The next day, the small inconsistencies continued. A book they left on the bed would appear on the chair in the reflection. The pattern on the curtains looked slightly different. Each instance was small enough to be dismissed on its own, but together, they were painting a very disturbing picture. They started to actively avoid looking at the mirror, trying to enjoy the last 2 days of their vacation. But it was hard to ignore something that took up an entire wall. It felt like a silent, unblinking eye, always present in their peripheral vision. On their second night, the unease turned into outright fear. Sarah woke up in the middle of the night needing a drink of water. Assess it. Up her eyes were drawn to the mirror. In the dim moonlight filtering through the window, she saw a clear, unmistakable image. A tall, thin figure of a man was standing at the foot of their bed in the reflection, just watching them. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't dare to look at the actual foot of the bed. She just squeezed her eyes shut, pulled the covers over her head, and prayed for morning to come. When she told Mark what she saw, he was pale. He wanted to believe she'd had a nightmare, but after his own experience with the shadow, he couldn't dismiss it. They considered checking out early, but they had already paid for the full stay, and tried to convince themselves it was all in their heads, a combination of the eerie old hotel and an overactive imagination. They decided to stick it out for one more night. That was a mistake. Their final night was the one that would haunt them forever. Unable to sleep, they lay awake in bed, talking in hushed tones, both of them too scared to admit just how terrified they were. The room was quiet except for the gentle lapping of the lake outside. At some point, Mark's gaze drifted towards the mirror, and what he saw made his blood run cold. He grabbed Sarah's arm, his hand trembling. She followed his terrified gaze to the wall. The mirror wasn't reflecting them. It wasn't reflecting the people lying awake, staring at it in fear. Instead, the mirror showed them both sound asleep, peacefully resting in bed. It was a perfect, still image of them sleeping, even as they were wide awake, staring right at it. It was like watching a recording, a live feed from a different reality, or a different time. They were looking at a version of themselves that didn't exist, trapped in the glass. They didn't scream. They were too frozen with a primal kind of terror. They slowly got out of bed, never taking their eyes off the horrifying reflection. Without a word, they grabbed their wallets and keys, left everything else behind, and fled the room. They ran down the hallway, not stopping until they burst into the brightly lit lobby. The night clerk, a weary-looking man, listened to their panicked story. He didn't look surprised. He just sighed and nodded slowly. He told them the mirror had been there since the hotel was built. It belonged to the original owner, a reclusive and eccentric man who was rumored to be obsessed with observing his guests. The story said he had found a way to record moments onto reflective surfaces, capturing glimpses of their private lives. He explained that Mark and Sarah were on the first to complain about that specific mirror in room 323. Guests had reported seeing things for years, objects moving, strange figures, and that chilling playback phenomenon. Most people just assumed it was their imagination. The hotel staff were instructed to downplay it, to talk about warped glass and tricks of the light. The couple checked out immediately, leaving the rest of their belongings to be shipped to them. They just wanted to get as far away from that place and that mirror as possible. A few weeks later, Mark, morbidly curious, called the hotel. He was told that after several more intense complaints following their stay, the management finally decided to have the mirror removed. 2 maintenance workers took it down, but they both reported feeling an intense coldness emanating from the glass and swore they saw fleeting images move across its surface as they carried it away. So what was that mirror? Was it a portal to another dimension? A device created by a disturbed man to spy on his guests even after his death? Or was it something more? A silent witness that had absorbed decades of moments, replaying them at random? We may never know, but it makes you think, doesn't it? The next time you're in a hotel room and you glance in the mirror, take a second look. Make sure the person looking back is really you, and that they're doing exactly what you're doing, because you never know who or what might be watching from the other side of the glass. Thanks for watching. If you have your own creepy hotel story, share it in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more spooky stories. Stay safe out there.